Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of History with Mrs. Lee. Today we're going to be looking at President number 5, James Monroe. James Monroe was lucky in the sense that he inherited a nation filled with nationalism after the War of 1812. And so this time period is called the Era of Good Feelings, because everybody's walking around saying how much they love our country. It's also a great time for Americans because after the War of 1812, we see a growth in our economy because so many Americans are starting to produce their own materials and produce their own manufactured goods. So lots of people are getting more money. We also see a lack of political party fighting. The Federalist Party is basically going to dwindle away at this time, and we're not going to have huge issues in Congress at first. All good things must come to an end, though, and that takes us over to the Missouri Compromise. Now, in 1819, we had a balance, 11 free states and 11 slave states. But when we studied the Northwest Ordinance, we learned that if you have a certain number of people living in your territory, you can apply for statehood. Okay? So here on my map, the line green represents the free states, and the red represents the slave states. Well, this territory right here, Missouri, they requested to become a state in the Union, and they would like to join as a slave state. These northern states, these free states, were very upset because if Missouri joins as a slave state, that means the balance in Congress is going to tip in favor of slave states. So, in the Missouri Compromise, Missouri is allowed to join as a slave state. However, this territory of Maine that used to be part of Massachusetts, it will become its own state, but it will join as a free state. So the Missouri Compromise is important because it helps balance our Congress. But there's another part of the Missouri Compromise. All this land that we were starting to acquire, or had already acquired, is going to be a bit concerning for Northerners and for Southerners. So if we follow the rules and we have a certain number of people in our territory and we apply to become a state, if these territories applied to become slave states, then northern free states are going to be very upset because it's going to throw the balance of Congress in the favor of slave states. If these territories become free states, then the southern states are going to be very upset because that's going to throw the favor in Congress to the free states. So, in this compromise, besides just Missouri and Maine joining the Union, we have the Missouri Compromise line. It's an imaginary line that says any future states that come out of these territories that are north of this 3630 north parallel line will become free states. Any states that come out of this territory in the future that are south of this line will become free states in hopes of keeping a balance in Congress. So, we discussed that the Missouri Compromise is important because it balances out Congress with an equal number of slave states and free states. But I also like to use the Band-Aid with Missouri Compromise. And the reason that I use the Band-Aid is because the Missouri Compromise is going to be a temporary fix to America avoiding a civil war. And we know that Band-Aids can't stay on forever. Eventually they're going to be ripped off. So this Missouri Compromise isn't going to stay this way forever, and not everybody's going to be happy over the next 20, 30, 40 years, and we'll see how this progresses by the time we get to the Civil War in 1861. Now, during Monroe's presidency, we had some foreign affairs issues, and one of them was with Spain. So one issue with Spain was that Andrew Jackson had gone into Florida to basically kick out some Native Americans from Georgia. And what we didn't know was that John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State for James Monroe, had already had a little treaty kind of going on with Spain where Spain was going to give the Florida Territory to the United States. Well, Andrew Jackson had already gone in and claimed that land for America. And instead of punishing Andrew Jackson and instead of just taking the land and saying, okay, it's ours, we decide to smooth things over, and John Quincy Adams in the Adams-Onis Treaty gives money to Spain in order to get the Florida Territory for the United States. The final foreign affair that we're going to discuss for James Monroe is probably the most significant, and that is the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine is also interesting because James Monroe didn't actually write this doctrine. It was written again by his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. Monroe Doctrine was about the Americas, and the Americas is all this land in the Western Hemisphere. So North America, Latin America, the Caribbean, South America. Okay? And during this time period, many European countries had taken lands in the Americas and formed colonies to strengthen their empires. Well, the United States starts to get a little bit nervous that these European powers are going to become greedy, and maybe the land that they take in the Caribbean isn't going to be enough for them, and they're going to want to come and invade the American land. We're also a little bit greedy on our part, and we feel like, hey, this land is in our hemisphere. Europe, you stay over there to the east, because we should be able to take some of these lands if we would like to do so. So, in the Monroe Doctrine, America basically says, Europe, stop. You may not come over to the Western Hemisphere to make any more colonies in the Americas. And if you do so, we will take it as a threat, and we will be willing to defend these countries and these pieces of land in the Western Hemisphere from you. So Monroe Doctrine is important because it stopped Europe from colonizing the Americas, and it's also important because it's going to keep us out of European affairs for almost 100 years until we get to World War I.